Hey everyone. Tonight we will explore 6 ancient empires deliberately erased from the annals of history. We'll uncover the stories of civilizations so dominant their complete disappearance seems impossible. We will investigate forgotten powerhouses of the ancient world and question the shadowy forces that conspired to wipe their monumental achievements from our collective memory, leaving only whispers behind. Like the video if you think this topic is interesting. Subscribe if you want more videos. Also, comment below where you're watching from. I'm reading all comments. History is a story told by the victors. It's a map, carefully drawn, with familiar continents of power: Egypt, Babylon, Rome. The coastlines are sharp, the territories clearly marked. But what if I told you this map is a lie? What if the vast, empty spaces we've been taught to ignore, the regions marked only by shifting sands and unnamed mountains, were once the centers of the world? What if the silence from these places isn't the silence of absence, but the muffled scream of a civilization that was deliberately gagged and buried? Tonight, we don't just read history. We perform an archaeological dig on the narrative itself. We take the official map, the one hanging in the classrooms of our minds, and we set it on fire. In the flickering light of its destruction, we will begin to see the shadows of other maps, other worlds, other empires. Empires so powerful, so sophisticated, that their complete removal from our collective memory seems not just improbable, but impossible. An act of violence against the past. Our journey begins in the sun-scorched highlands of what we now call Turkey. On the standard map, this is Anatolia, a rugged land bridge between east and west, a place things pass through. For centuries, it was considered a backwater of antiquity, a supporting actor in the grand drama of its neighbors. The narrative was simple. To the south, the golden pharaohs ruled the Nile. To the east, the lawgivers of Mesopotamia built cities of mud brick and ambition. Between them, a void. But feel the dry wind on your face, a wind that blows across this high plateau. It whispers a different story. It carries the dust of a colossal ghost, a superpower whose name was scrubbed from the stone, whose deeds were reduced to a footnote, whose very existence was doubted for 3,000 years. The unspoken truth whispers from the bedrock itself. This was not a void. This was the heart of a fearsome and brilliant empire. An empire of iron and law, of 1,000 gods and the world's first peace treaty. An empire that stared Egypt in the eye and did not blink. An empire called Hatti, the land of the Hittites. And the first, most insidious layer of their erasure? It was hiding in plain sight. For millennia, the only place you could find the name Hittite was in the pages of the Old Testament. And there, they are a caricature, a bit player. They are presented as a small Canaanite tribe, a footnote in someone else's story. Uriah the Hittite, a loyal soldier betrayed by King David. A few scattered references to a people from whom Abraham buys a burial plot. They are depicted as a minor regional clan, easily absorbed and ultimately irrelevant. This is the story that was allowed to survive. A story so convincing, so thoroughly propagated, that by the 19th century, esteemed scholars and historians dismissed the Hittites as a biblical fiction, a myth. Think about the sheer audacity of this historical sleight of hand. Imagine the Roman Empire being remembered only for a single legionary mentioned in a foreign text. Imagine Egypt being reduced to a brief note about a trade deal for some grain. It's not just a distortion, it's a character assassination on a civilizational scale. The accepted history, the one you were taught, took a world power, an equal to the mighty Ramesses II, and shrank it into a footnote. The question isn't just how this happened. The question is why. Why was it so important that the Hittites be forgotten? To find the answer, you have to leave the library, leave the accepted texts, and step into the ruins themselves. Picture yourself in central Anatolia in the year 1834. You are the French explorer Charles Texier. You are pushing through a wild, remote landscape near the village of Bogazkoy. The locals speak of massive stone walls, of strange carvings in the rock. You are skeptical, but intrigued. You crest a hill, and the world falls away. Before you, sprawling across a rocky, windswept citadel, are the bones of a dead giant. You see walls, cyclopean in scale, built from multi-ton blocks of stone, fitted together with impossible precision. You walk through a gateway flanked by two immense lions, their stone muscles still rippling with power, their empty eyes staring into eternity. You find another gate guarded by a sphinx, its face a serene and unsettling blend of Anatolian and Egyptian art. You discover a tunnel, a corbelled stone archway running 70 meters long, plunging into the earth beneath the city's ramparts. It's a secret passage, a sally port, an engineering marvel designed for soldiers to emerge from the very ground like vengeful spirits. You are standing in a place that shouldn't exist. This is no tribal outpost. This is a metropolis, a fortress city built to defy armies and the ages. You don't know its name yet, but you can feel its power thrumming in the stones beneath your feet. You have just stumbled upon Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire. And you have just torn the first page from the Book of Lies. For decades, the ruins remained a mystery, a colossal question mark in the heart of Turkey. But the true revelation, the key that would unlock the soul of this lost empire, wasn't found in the monumental stones. It was smaller, more intimate. It lay buried in the rubble of what was once a great temple, a royal library. Imagine the scene in 1906. German archaeologists are digging, their shovels scraping against something hard. Not stone, but baked clay. A single tablet, then another, and another. Soon they are unearthing them by the thousands. Tens of thousands of clay tablets, covered in the dense wedge-shaped script of Mesopotamian cuneiform. You are there in the dusty trench. An archaeologist hands you one of the tablets. It's heavy in your hands, cool to the touch. You run your finger over the intricate marks, a language silent for 3 millennia. This isn't just a piece of pottery. This is a voice, a letter, a law, a prayer, a memory, fired into permanence. This is the royal archive of Hattusa. The Hittites, so long silent, were about to speak. And when they spoke, the history of the ancient world cracked wide open. The decipherment was a monumental task. The script was cuneiform, but the language it recorded was unknown to humanity. It was an Indo-European tongue, a distant cousin to Sanskrit, Latin, and English, the oldest ever recorded. And as scholars like the Czech linguist Bedřich Rosny painstakingly pieced together the grammar and vocabulary, a universe appeared. These tablets were not the crude records of a forgotten tribe. This was the bureaucratic, legal, and diplomatic output of a vast and complex imperial state. You are in that dusty tent, the lantern light flickering as the translations begin to flow. You read of laws that are shockingly progressive for their time. While the famous Code of Hammurabi in Babylon demanded an eye for an eye, the Hittite Code prescribed restitution. If you blinded a man in a fight, you didn't lose your own eye. You paid him a fine of 40 shekels of silver. It was a legal system built on compensation, not just retribution, suggesting a society with a pragmatic, almost commercial view of justice. You unearth royal decrees, detailed census records, and intricate instructions for temple rituals. You find letters, personal and political, that bring these long-dead people to life. You read the correspondence between the powerful Hittite queen Puruhepa and the pharaoh Ramesses II, where she addresses the master of Egypt not as a subordinate, but as an equal, a sister-in-law, discussing the marriage of her daughter with the shrewdness of a master diplomat. This wasn't a lost tribe. This was the missing superpower. The third pillar of the Bronze Age world, standing shoulder to shoulder with Egypt and Babylon. And these tablets revealed the secret to their power, a secret forged in the heart of their mountains, a secret they guarded more closely than gold, the secret of iron. The hidden truth reveals that the Hittites were not just participants in the Bronze Age. They were their harbingers of doom. They were the pioneers of the Iron Age. While their rivals were building armies of bronze, a metal that was expensive and often controlled by distant powers, the Hittites were looking to the red earth of their own Anatolian hills. They were learning to tame a metal that was far more difficult, far more demanding, but ultimately far more deadly. The hidden truth reveals that the Hittites were not just participants in the Bronze Age. They were their harbingers of doom. They were the pioneers of the Iron Age. While their rivals were building armies of bronze, a metal that was expensive and often controlled by distant powers, the Hittites were looking to the red earth of their own Anatolian hills. They were learning to tame a metal that was far more difficult, far more demanding, but ultimately far more deadly. Imagine a Hittite forge tucked away in the high city of Hattusa, a state-controlled workshop. The air is thick with the acrid smoke of burning charcoal. The heat is a physical blow, a shimmering wall that distorts the world around you. You hear the rhythmic roar of the bellows, men forcing air into the bloomery furnace, a clay and stone structure packed with iron ore and charcoal. They are not just melting metal. They are coaxing a chemical transformation. They are striving to reach a temperature of 1200 degrees Celsius, a heat that will make the iron ore give up its oxygen, leaving behind a spongy, incandescent mass of iron called a bloom. You watch as smiths, their bodies slick with sweat, use tongs to drag the glowing bloom from the furnace. They heave it onto an anvil, and the hammers begin to fall. A shower of sparks explodes with every deafening blow, the ringing of iron on iron a brutal symphony. They are not just shaping the metal, they are purifying it, hammering out the glassy slag, folding and reforging the iron to strengthen it. Through trial and error, through generations of guarded knowledge, they learned to carburize it, to introduce carbon from the charcoal fire into the iron structure, creating a primitive but effective steel. The result? A sword that could shatter a bronze blade, a spear point that wouldn't bend or dull on impact. Iron was harder, it held a sharper edge, and its source was plentiful in their own lands. It was a technological revolution, and for a time they held a near monopoly on its production. This knowledge was a state secret, a weapon more powerful than any single army. And they built an army to wield it. But iron was only half of the equation. Their true genius, the innovation that would allow them to project their power across the known world, was a revolution in military tactics. To understand its impact, you have to erase the image of the Egyptian chariot from your mind. The Egyptian model, the one you see in the movies, was a light, two-man vehicle. Its axle was at the very back, making it fast but unstable, a mobile platform for an archer. It was designed for skirmishing, for harassing the enemy from a distance. The Hittite chariot was different. It was a predator. You are standing on a Hittite training ground, a dusty plain outside the city walls. A squadron of chariots thunders past. The ground trembles. The design is heavier, more robust. The key innovation is the axle. It's not at the back, it's in the center. This small change has enormous consequences. It makes the chariot more stable, more durable, able to handle rougher terrain without tipping. And it allows for a heavier load. It allows for a third man. Look closely as one pulls to a halt. There is the driver, his hands gripping the leather reins, his focus absolute. Beside him is the warrior, armed not just with a bow, but with a long, iron-tipped spear. And standing with them, a third man, a shield-bearer, his sole purpose to protect the other two. This isn't a skirmishing vehicle anymore. This is a mobile weapons platform, a shock weapon. It's the ancient world's equivalent of an armored personnel carrier, a primitive tank designed to do one thing: break the enemy. The training is relentless, years of it. The driver learns to control the two powerful horses, to wheel and turn in perfect unison with the rest of the squadron. The warrior masters the art of throwing a spear from a moving, bouncing platform, of fighting with a sword in close quarters. The shield-bearer learns to anticipate threats, to become a living wall of bronze and leather. They are not three men. They are one weapon. And in 1274 BCE, near a fortified city on the Orontes River in Syria, this weapon would be unleashed in one of the largest and most famous battles of the ancient world. A battle that should have cemented the Hittites' name in history forever, but instead became a prelude to their disappearance. The Battle of Kadesh. Imagine you are a young Hittite spearman, part of the elite chariot corps of King Muwatalli II. For weeks you have marched south from Hattusa, part of a colossal army. 47,000 men, and more than 3,500 of your three-man chariots, an iron fist rolling toward Syria. Your target is the upstart Egyptian pharaoh, a young, arrogant king named Ramesses II, who has marched his own army north to reclaim the city of Kadesh for Egypt. The air is hot and sticky, the dust of the march coating your leather armor, your throat raw. But there is a tension, a focused energy that crackles through the camp. King Muwatalli is a brilliant strategist. He has a plan. It is a plan of deception, of breathtaking audacity. You watch as two local tribesmen are brought into the camp. They are coached, given a story, and then sent out to be captured by the Egyptian scouts. Their mission, to lie, to tell the Pharaoh that the main Hittite army is far to the north, near Aleppo, too afraid to face the might of Egypt. It's a gamble that relies on the enemy's arrogance, and Ramesses, young and hungry for glory, takes the bait. His army, nearly 20,000 strong, is marching in 4 divisions named after the gods Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Set. They are stretched out over miles of terrain, dangerously exposed. Ramesses, with his personal guard and the Amun division, pushes ahead, eager to reach Kadesh and set up camp. He is utterly blind to the truth. The truth is, you and the entire Hittite army are not in Aleppo. You are hidden, right now, just behind the city of Kadesh. You are crouched with your 2 crewmates in the cab of your chariot, the horses stamping impatiently, their breath misting in the cool morning air. You can hear the jingle of harnesses, the low murmur of thousands of men trying to stay silent. The tension is unbearable. You peek over the ridge. In the distance, you can see the Egyptian camp being hastily assembled, the division of Amun. They are exposed, unprepared. The trap is set. Then comes the signal, a horn blast that cuts through the silence, and the world explodes into motion. Your driver screams, the whip cracks, and the chariot lurches forward. You are thrown against the wooden frame, your knuckles white as you grip your spear. All around you, thousands of chariots are cresting the ridge at once. A wave of wood, iron, and horseflesh. A thunderous avalanche of destruction pouring down onto the plain. The Egyptian Ra division, marching up to support the Pharaoh, is caught completely in the open. They have no time to form a line, no time to prepare. They look up from their march and see the apocalypse. The sound is a physical force. The roar of 10,000 wheels, the pounding of 14,000 hooves, the war cries of thousands of men. Your chariot smashes into their flank. The impact is sickening, a crunch of bone and splintering shields. Your spearman thrusts again and again, a blur of motion. The chaos is absolute. The Egyptian lines dissolve not in minutes, but in seconds. It's not a battle, it's a slaughter. Men are screaming, running, trampled under the hooves of your horses. The proud Ra division ceases to exist. It becomes a field of bodies. Your squadron doesn't stop. You wheel, reformed, and charge straight for the Pharaoh's own camp. You crash through the hastily erected barricades. The scene inside is one of panic and desperation. Tents are trampled, supplies scattered. You see the Pharaoh himself, Ramesses, caught in the heart of the storm, fighting for his life, trying to rally his personal guard. For a moment, the fate of the ancient world hangs in the balance. The great Ramesses, the living god, is on the verge of being killed or captured. His empire, leaderless, would crumble. The Hittites would be the sole masters of the Near East. But the Hittite charge, so disciplined in its initial assault, now breaks down. Greed overcomes tactics. Your comrades, seeing the unbelievable riches of the Pharaoh's camp, gold, silver, weapons, pull up their chariots and begin to loot. The momentum is lost. The trap, so perfectly sprung, begins to unravel. This moment of indiscipline gives Ramesses the opening he needs. He rallies his guard and launches a desperate counterattack. At the same time, a separate Egyptian force, arriving by a different route, appears on the battlefield and smashes into the flank of the now disorganized Hittite charioteers. The tide of battle turns. Your chariot is now bogged down, surrounded. The hunters have become the hunted. The rest of the day is a brutal, swirling melee, a desperate fight for survival. By nightfall, the battlefield is a ruin. Thousands are dead on both sides. The plain of Kadesh is a charnel house, littered with shattered chariots, dead horses, and the bodies of men from two great empires. In the aftermath, something extraordinary happens. Both sides claim victory. Ramesses returns to Egypt and covers the temple walls with inscriptions and reliefs proclaiming his stunning triumph, how he single-handedly defeated the Hittite hordes. He depicts himself as a towering hero, a true son of Amun. This is the story that will be told for the next 3,000 years. The Egyptian version, the victor's version. But in the dusty archives of Hattusa, you find the real story. The Hittite accounts describe the battle as a decisive victory for them. They crushed 2 Egyptian divisions, nearly captured the pharaoh, and successfully prevented the Egyptians from taking Kadesh. They remained in control of Syria. Who was telling the truth? The unspoken truth whispers that both were. It was a bloody tactical stalemate. But the event that followed the battle is far more significant than the battle itself. It reveals the true nature of the Hittite Empire, a nature so at odds with the typical image of ancient conquerors that it may be one of the reasons they were so easily forgotten. They didn't just wage war, they perfected peace. 16 years after the slaughter at Kadesh, around the year 1259 BCE, the Hittite king Hattusili III, the successor to Muwatalli, negotiated a treaty with Ramesses II. This wasn't a simple truce. It was the most comprehensive and sophisticated peace treaty the world had ever seen. A copy of it, inscribed on a massive clay tablet in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the day, was found in the ruins of Hattusa. A version of it, carved in hieroglyphs, was found on the walls of the Karnak temple in Egypt. Imagine you are a Hittite scribe, your stylus pressing the wedge-shaped symbols into the soft, wet clay. This is not a conqueror's decree. It is a document between equals. It begins by declaring an end to all hostilities, forever. There shall be no hostilities between them, forever. The great king of Hatti shall not pass over into the land of Egypt forever. And the great ruler of Egypt shall not pass over into the land of Hatti forever. But it goes further. It's a mutual defense pact. If either empire is attacked by a third party or faces an internal rebellion, the other is bound by the treaty to send troops to their aid. It's an ancient NATO, a pact of collective security. It establishes, for the first time in recorded history, a fixed and recognized international border between the 2 empires in Syria. And, most remarkably, it includes detailed clauses for the extradition of political refugees. If a nobleman or a commoner flees from Egypt to Hatti, the Hittite king is sworn to capture them and return them. But the treaty specifies they are not to be punished for their crime. Their property is to be returned to them, their families left unharmed. It's a clause of amnesty, of forgiveness, woven into the fabric of international law. At the end of the document, you inscribe the witness list. But it's not a list of generals or ministers. It is a list of the gods. The 1,000 gods and goddesses of the land of Hatti, and the 1,000 gods and goddesses of the land of Egypt are called upon to bear witness to these oaths. And there are curses, terrible and specific, for whoever dares to break the treaty. This is the Hittite genius. They approached diplomacy with the same legalistic, contractual precision that they approached their own laws and even their own religion. They understood that true, lasting power wasn't just about winning on the battlefield. It was about creating a stable, predictable world order through law. This silver tablet, as the original was called, represents a level of political and philosophical sophistication that history chose to forget. It doesn't fit the simple narrative of brutal ancient empires locked in a constant struggle for dominance. The Hittites were warriors, yes, but they were also lawyers, diplomats, and pragmatists. They were a complex, multifaceted civilization, and their worldview, their entire social structure, was as unique as their chariots and their laws. To understand them, you have to understand their relationship with the divine. The Hittites were famously the people of 1,000 gods. When they conquered a new territory, they didn't impose their own gods. They adopted the gods of the conquered. Their pantheon was a sprawling, ever-growing collection of deities from every corner of their empire. Hurrian storm gods, Syrian fertility goddesses, Mesopotamian sun gods, all brought to Hattusa to be worshipped in the state temples. It was a policy of religious inclusion that was also a brilliant tool of imperial control, binding diverse peoples to the central state. At the apex of this divine and earthly pyramid was the king. But unlike the Egyptian pharaoh, the Hittite king was not a living god. He was the high priest, the supreme commander, the chief justice. But he was a man. Only upon his death did he become a god. And his power, while immense, was not absolute. In the early days of the empire, he was checked by a council of nobles known as the Panku, an assembly that had the power to challenge the king on matters of law and succession. It was a rudimentary form of constitutional monarchy, a concept that wouldn't reappear in the West for thousands of years. And the women of the royal court, particularly the queen, the Tawanana, wielded extraordinary power. She was not just a consort, she was a co-ruler. She held religious authority as a high priestess, and, as the letters of Queen Puduhepa show, she was a major player in international diplomacy, a kingmaker and a stateswoman in her own right. This was a society of surprising complexity, a military powerhouse that valued the rule of law, a deeply religious people who approached their gods like lawyers, with detailed contracts of worship and expectation. And their rituals, their spiritual practices, were as strange and specific as their laws. Consider the military oath, the ritual you would have to undergo as a new recruit. You are standing on a parade ground, the wind whipping your tunic. A priest, a military officer, officiates. He holds up a woman's dress, a spindle, and a mirror. He proclaims that any soldier who breaks his oath of loyalty to the king, who harbors ill will will have his manhood taken from him. His weapons will be broken, and he will be dressed as a woman and made to do a woman's work. The priest then brings out wax figurines. He places them in a fire. As they melt and deform, he cries out, "As this wax melts, so shall the man who breaks this oath melt away." He pours out water. So shall his seed be poured out. It's a terrifying ceremony of psychological conditioning, binding the army to the king through fear and sympathetic magic. It reveals a worldview where the spiritual and the practical, the legal and the magical, are inextricably intertwined. This unique and powerful civilization did not exist in a vacuum. To truly grasp the world the Hittites dominated and the reasons for their erasure, we must look to their great rival, the empire they shattered and absorbed to achieve their supremacy. We must turn our attention to an even deeper shadow on the historical map, a kingdom so thoroughly forgotten it has been called a ghost empire, the kingdom of Mitanni. If the Hittites were buried under a footnote, the Mitanni were buried under nothing at all. For centuries, their name was known only from a handful of references in Egyptian and Hittite texts. There were no Mitannian king lists, no chronicles, no great monuments bearing their name. Their capital city, the fabled Washukani, remains lost to this day, one of the great unsolved mysteries of archaeology. They were a phantom, a powerful political entity that rose, dominated northern Mesopotamia and Syria for 2 centuries, and then vanished as if they had never been. The unspoken truth whispers that the story of the Hittites cannot be told without the story of the Mitanni. They were the gatekeepers. Before the Hittites could challenge Egypt, they first had to break the power of this enigmatic Hurrian kingdom. The population of Mitanni was primarily Hurrian-speaking, a people with a unique language and culture distinct from their Semitic and Indo-European neighbors. But their ruling class, their elite, was something else entirely. The evidence is scant but tantalizing. In that treaty between the Hittite king Suppiluliuma I and the defeated Mitanni king Shatiwaza, the divine witnesses are invoked. And alongside the familiar gods of Mesopotamia, we find 4 strange names: Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and the Nasatya twins. These are not Hurrian or Mesopotamian gods. These are the gods of the Rig Veda. They are the deities of the Indo-Aryans, the people who would later migrate into India. This single text is a bombshell. It reveals that the Mitanni Empire was ruled by an Indo-Aryan warrior aristocracy. And their specialty? The source of their power was the horse. The Mitanni were the undisputed masters of horse training and chariot warfare in their time. They were led by a class of elite charioteers known as the Marianu. These were not just soldiers. They were a social class, a knightly order bound by a code of honor whose entire culture revolved around the light, spoked-wheel chariot. The most incredible artifact of their equestrian genius wasn't even found in their own lands. It was found in the Hittite archives at Hattusa. It is a text known as the Kikili Manual. You are back in that archive, a clay tablet in your hands. It is a detailed, day-by-day horse training manual, written around 1345 BCE. The author is a man named Kikili, a master horse trainer from the land of Mitanni. It is the oldest, most comprehensive guide to equine conditioning ever discovered. And it is shockingly modern. Kikali's methods are not based on brute force, but on a sophisticated understanding of sports science. He prescribes a 214-day training regimen that includes interval training, alternating periods of walking, trotting, and cantering. He details specific diets, warm-ups, cool-downs, and even the use of horse blankets. It's a system designed to build the animal's stamina, muscle, and wind, very similar to the methods used to train modern thoroughbred racehorses or Olympic equestrian mounts. This tablet is a window into the soul of the Mitanni elite. Their power was built on this deep, symbiotic relationship with their horses. Their Marianu warriors, atop chariots pulled by these expertly conditioned animals, were the fastest, most resilient force of their day. For over a century, they dominated the political landscape, controlling vital trade routes, reducing the powerful city-state of Assyria to a vassal, and even forcing the mighty Egyptian pharaohs to seek alliances with them through marriage. The Amarna letters, that diplomatic archive found in Egypt, are filled with correspondence from the Mitanni king Tushratta, who married his daughter Taduhipa to the pharaoh Amenhotep III, sending her with a dowry of staggering wealth. For a time, the Mitanni were at the center of the world, a great power, a hub of culture and innovation. So why are they a ghost? Because they were caught in a vice. In the mid-14th century BCE, a brilliant and ruthless Hittite king ascended the throne. His name was Shupaluliyama I. He saw the Mitanni kingdom weakened by internal power struggles, and he struck. At the same time, the vassal state of Assyria, long chafing under Mitanni rule, saw its chance for revenge and rose in rebellion from the east. The war was brutal. Shupaluliyama's reformed Hittite army, with its heavy chariots and iron discipline, proved superior. He invaded Mitanni territory, sacked the capital of Washukani, and installed his own puppet ruler on the throne. The Ghost Empire was broken, partitioned between the triumphant Hittites in the west and the resurgent Assyrians in the east. Their political identity was erased. Their population was absorbed. Their history was subsumed by their conquerors. They left behind no great law codes, no epic poems, no king lists of their own. Their story is told only by the rivals who destroyed them. They are the ultimate example of a people erased by the victors. The Hittites, by destroying the Mitanni, had cleared the board. They now stood as the undisputed masters of Anatolia and northern Syria. Their confrontation with Egypt at Kadesh was the logical next step. Their subsequent peace treaty with Ramesses ushered in a golden age, a period of stability and prosperity that lasted for over 50 years. They were at their zenith. Their empire was secure, their borders defined, their trade flourishing. From your vantage point in the grand halls of Hattusa, the future of the Hittite Empire would have seemed eternal. The storm god of Hatti was triumphant. The king was secure. The world was in balance. But history is not a straight line. It is a series of ruptures. And the world of the Late Bronze Age was about to be torn apart by a cataclysm so violent, so widespread, that it would plunge the entire Eastern Mediterranean into a dark age for centuries. A perfect storm of calamity was brewing, a storm that would not just topple the Hittite Empire, but would scour its very memory from the earth. The first signs of trouble would have been subtle. You would have seen it in the grain reports, inscribed on the clay tablets in the royal storehouses. Year after year, the yields are lower. The rains are failing. Letters from the Hittite court to their vassals in Syria become more and more desperate, begging for shipments of grain to avert a famine in the homeland. Recent paleoclimatological studies of ancient tree rings and lakebed sediments confirm this. The late 13th and early 12th centuries BCE saw a prolonged and severe period of drought across the region. The agricultural backbone of the empire was cracking. Then came the internal strife. The carefully constructed laws of succession began to fail. Rival claimants to the throne plunged the empire into civil war. The vassal states, sensing weakness at the center, began to break away. The intricate web of treaties and loyalties that held the empire together was unraveling, thread by thread. And then, from the sea, came a new terror. Egyptian inscriptions from this period speak of them with dread. They are the Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of seafaring raiders who swept down from the Aegean and the central Mediterranean. Their names are strange: the Peliset, the Taker, the Sheridan, the Luca. We don't know exactly who they were or where they came from. They were not a single nation, but a wave of displaced, desperate, and violent peoples set in motion by the same climate change and societal collapse that was weakening the great empires. Imagine you are on the southern coast of Anatolia. You see their ships on the horizon, not the familiar trading vessels, but sleek, fast galleys filled with warriors. They swarm ashore, burning cities, slaughtering populations, disrupting the vital sea trade routes for copper and tin that were the lifeblood of the Bronze Age economy. The Hittite coastal cities fall one by one. The supply lines are severed. The empire is now isolated, starving, and tearing itself apart from within. The final blow came around 1178 BCE. The end was swift and violent. Archaeological evidence at Hattusa shows a city put to the torch. The great temples were looted, the palaces burned, the massive fortifications breached. The last king of the Hittites, Shupilomima II, vanishes from the historical record, likely killed in the fighting. The city of Hattusa, for 500 years the capital of a world power, was abandoned to the wind and the wolves. The Hittite Empire was not just defeated, it ceased to exist. But collapse is not the same as erasure. Other empires have fallen, yet we remember them. Rome fell, but its legacy is everywhere. Why were the Hittites different? Why did their memory fade so completely that they became a myth? The hidden truth reveals that it wasn't one single factor, but a confluence of events that created a perfect erasure. A systematic dismantling of their legacy, both accidental and intentional. First, there was the silence of language. The Hittite language and their cuneiform script was the specialized knowledge of a scribal elite. When that elite was scattered and killed in the collapse, the knowledge died with them. There was no Hittite Rosetta Stone. For 3,000 years, their thousands of tablets were nothing more than meaningless marks on clay. Their voice was silenced. Second, there was the silence of place. After the fall of Hattusa, new peoples moved into the Anatolian highlands, the Phrygians, the Lydians. They built their own towns and cities, often directly on top of the Hittite ruins. They buried the Hittite past under their own present. The great monuments, the temples, the gates, were covered by meters of earth and debris, their memory fading from local folklore until even their location was forgotten. Third, there was the narrative of the rivals. The one great power that survived the late Bronze Age collapse, albeit weakened, was Egypt. And the Egyptian version of history, the story of Ramesses' great victory at Kadesh, became the official story. The Egyptians had no interest in preserving the memory of the Hittites as a powerful rival and equal. In their histories, the Hittites were a foe who had been vanquished. The historical record, controlled by the survivors, wrote them out of the script. And finally, there was the biblical narrative. As the primary historical document for the Western world for centuries, its portrayal of the Hittites as a small, insignificant tribe became dogma. It was the final nail in the coffin of their memory. It confirmed their irrelevance, closing the book on any further inquiry for nearly 2,000 years. A complex language that died, a homeland that was buried, a rival who rewrote the story, and a sacred text that minimized their existence. Together, these factors created a void, an empty space on the map. It was the perfect crime against history, an empire erased so thoroughly that its rediscovery in the 20th century was like finding proof of Atlantis. We are left with a chilling thought. The Hittites were not a primitive people. They were a civilization of immense sophistication, masters of war, law, and diplomacy. They built cities to last in eternity and signed treaties that were meant to bind the future. And yet, they vanished. Their story is a profound and disturbing reminder of the fragility of memory, of how easily even the greatest powers on earth can be edited out of existence. It forces us to ask, what else is lurking in the blank spaces on our maps? The Hittites were rediscovered by chance. Their voice was restored by the painstaking work of a few brilliant scholars. How many other ghost empires are still out there, waiting in silence? How many other Mitannis are there, whose capitals we have yet to find, whose stories are known only through the biased records of their enemies? The erasure of the Hittites was not a simple act of forgetting. It was the result of a catastrophic collapse, followed by a systematic, if not entirely conscious, process of historical suppression. The silence that fell over Anatolia in 1178 BCE was profound. But it was not the only silence. As we move from the highlands of Turkey to the deserts of Africa and the steppes of Asia, we will find that the map of the ancient world is riddled with such voids. And in each one, a forgotten empire lies waiting. An empire with its own secrets, its own power, and its own dark reasons for having been wiped from the pages of our history books. The silence is about to be broken again. The story you've been told is a comfortable one, a familiar path through the past. You've walked the halls of the pharaohs in Thebes, stood in the shadow of the Colosseum, and heard the whispers of oracles at Delphi. But now we leave that well-trodden road. I want you to journey south with me, far beyond the last of the great Egyptian temples at Abu Simbel, past the first cataract of the Nile, into a land the Egyptians themselves called Ta Seti, the land of the bow. This is Nubia, a region often painted as a footnote in Egypt's story, a source of gold, slaves, and soldiers, a subordinate kingdom basking in the reflected glory of its northern neighbor. You've been led to believe that power flowed in only one direction on the Nile, north to south, that Egypt was the master and Nubia the eternal apprentice. The hidden truth reveals a current of power flowing in the opposite direction, a flood of such force that it would not just challenge Egypt, but completely consume it. The civilization that history tried to demote to a mere vassal state would rise to become its master, in one of the most stunning and deliberately obscured reversals of fortune in the ancient world. This is the story of the Kingdom of Kush, and its saga begins not with submission, but with fire and iron. Imagine standing on the banks of the Nile around 1700 BCE. But this isn't the Egypt of the postcards. You are in Kerma, the first capital of Kush, in what is now modern Sudan. The air is thick with the heat of the sub-Saharan sun, the sweet smell of acacia trees, and the earthy scent of the river silt. But another smell hangs in the air, the acrid tang of industry. You see, long before the great Kushite kings who would later conquer Egypt, a sophisticated, powerful, and distinctly African culture was thriving here. Archaeologists, peeling back the layers of sand and misconception, have uncovered a city that defies the old narrative. You see no pyramids in the Egyptian style. Instead, your gaze is drawn to a colossal structure of mud brick, the Western Defufa. It stands nearly 20 meters high, a solid, imposing temple fortress that looks like nothing in Egypt. Its purpose is still debated, but its message is clear. This is not a copy. This is an original. Inside, you might have witnessed ceremonies dedicated to Nubian gods, rituals whose meaning is now lost to us, performed by a powerful priesthood that answered to no one in Thebes. The society here was wealthy, built on control of the trade routes that brought ivory, ebony, incense, and gold from the heart of Africa. Their artisans produced some of the finest pottery of the ancient world, delicate, eggshell-thin ceramics with a distinctive black top and red base, polished to a brilliant sheen. Their warriors were so feared for their skill with the bow that Egyptian pharaohs hired them as elite mercenaries. For centuries, this was the balance of power, a tense rivalry, a dance of trade and warfare between two great Nile kingdoms. Then came the Egyptian New Kingdom, the age of warrior pharaohs like Thutmose III. Around 1500 BCE, Egypt, at the zenith of its power, marched south and conquered Kush. They sacked Kerma, built temples to their own gods, and installed viceroys to govern the land. For the next 500 years, Nubia was an Egyptian colony. And this is where the conventional story usually ends. Nubia was Egyptianized, its culture absorbed, its power broken forever. It became a backwater, a shadow of its former self. But the unspoken truth whispers a different story. It speaks of resilience, of a culture that bent but did not break. The Kushites adopted many Egyptian gods, like Amun, but they did not forget their own. They learned to write in hieroglyphs, but they spoke their own language. They watched, they learned, and they waited. And as the new kingdom of Egypt began to crumble from within, weakened by internal strife, political fragmentation, and invasions from the Libyans and the Sea Peoples, the Kushites saw their moment. Power in Egypt was fractured, with local dynasties and Libyan chieftains carving up the north.
The sacred traditions, the divine order of Ma'at, were being corrupted. And so from the Kushite heartland, a new power rose, centered not at the ashes of Kerma, but further south at a holy mountain the Egyptians themselves revered, Jebel Barkal. Imagine yourself there, in the new Kushite capital of Napata, around 744 BCE. The mountain is a stunning sight, a 98-meter-high sandstone butte with a natural pinnacle that from the right angle looks exactly like a giant cobra, the sacred uraeus, the symbol of pharaonic kingship. For the Kushites, this was no coincidence. This was the home of the state god Amun, the true source of divine kingship, not the corrupted temples of the north. Here, a king named Kashta declared himself the rightful heir to the pharaonic tradition, but it was his son, Pi, who would fulfill this audacious claim. Pi was not just a king, he was a zealot, a man who believed with every fiber of his being that he was on a divine mission. We don't have to guess at his motives. He told us himself. His story is not written by his enemies, but carved in his own words on a towering granite monument, the Victory Stele of Pi, one of the most remarkable and personal documents to survive from the ancient world. Let us step into his campaign. The year is 728 BCE. You are a soldier in Pi's army, marching north from Napata. You are not a barbarian horde. You are a disciplined, professional force. The core of your army is the archery corps, men who have trained with the powerful Nubian longbow since childhood, capable of loosing arrows with pinpoint accuracy. Your infantry is well equipped, your cavalry swift. But this is not just a military campaign. It is a pilgrimage. Before you set out, you have witnessed King Pi himself making offerings at the temple of Amun at Jebel Barkal. He has told you that you are not invaders. You are liberators, chosen by Amun to cleanse and reunify the two lands. Your first major obstacle is the great city of Hermopolis, ruled by a powerful Libyan chieftain named Nimlat. The siege is long and brutal. P.A. Stele describes the scene in vivid detail. A great rampart is built to overtop the city walls. Siege towers are erected. The air is filled with the whirring of arrows and the crash of stones from catapults. For days the battle rages. Finally, Nimlat surrenders. But it is what happens next that reveals P.A.'s true character. Nimlat sends his wife and daughters to plead with the women of P.A.'s court. He brings P.A. a tribute, not of gold, but of his finest horses. And P.A., a passionate lover of horses, is more moved by the sight of these magnificent horses having starved during the siege than by the city's riches. He chastises Nimlat for their treatment, a strangely personal and humanizing detail in a record of conquest.
You march on, city after city falling to your advance. You reach Memphis, the ancient capital of Egypt, a formidable fortress. The defenders are defiant. They have raised the walls, strengthened the battlements, and trust in the great river to protect them. They mock your Kushite army. But Pi is a brilliant strategist. He rejects a long siege. Instead, he devises a daring plan. You watch as his engineers gather every boat in the harbor. Under the cover of darkness, you and your fellow soldiers board the vessels. But you do not attack the mighty walls. Instead, you sail directly to the harbor front of the city, where the houses are built right up to the water. Using the ship's masts as ladders, you storm the city from its supposedly secure riverfront. The chaos is immediate. The city falls in a bloody rush. Paye Stele claims the slaughter was immense, a brutal but necessary act to break the back of the northern resistance. With Memphis taken, the remaining Delta kings, including the powerful Tefnacht of Sais, have no choice but to submit. Paye Stele describes them coming before him, their heads bowed. He allows them to continue as vassal rulers, but his authority is absolute. He has done the impossible. A Nubian king, from a land long considered a provincial backwater, has conquered all of Egypt. He is now Paye, pharaoh of the 25th dynasty of Egypt. The reign of the Black Pharaohs had begun. This was not a period of decline, but a renaissance. Paye and his successors, Shabaka, Shabitku, and the great Taharka, saw themselves as restorers of Egyptian tradition. They revered the old gods, commissioned magnificent building projects in the classic Egyptian style at Karnak and Memphis, and studied the ancient texts. Taharka, in particular, was a prolific builder. If you walk through the great temple complex at Karnak today, you can still see the single colossal column, all that remains of a grand kiosk he built in the main forecourt, a testament to his power and piety. They ruled a vast empire, stretching from the heart of modern Sudan all the way to the Mediterranean, and for a time into the Levant. They were, for a brief, brilliant moment, the most powerful rulers in the world. So why was this extraordinary dynasty, this incredible story of reversal, so thoroughly erased from the popular imagination? The hidden truth reveals a multi-pronged campaign of historical suppression. First, their successors, the Egyptian 26th dynasty, and later the Greek and Roman historians, deliberately cast them as foreign invaders, downplaying their legitimacy and their cultural contributions. They were Ethiopians, a generic term for black Africans, outsiders who had briefly interrupted the true course of Egyptian history. Second, their ultimate defeat came at the hands of a new ruthless superpower, the Assyrian Empire. Armed with superior iron weapons and a brutal military machine, the Assyrians invaded Egypt, sacking Thebes in 663 BCE and driving the Kushite pharaohs back to their Nubian homeland. The victors, as always, wrote the history, and the Assyrians had no interest in celebrating the glory of their defeated Kushite foes. But the most profound reason for their erasure lies in their southern capital, in the heart of their enduring power. After being expelled from Egypt, the Kushite kingdom did not collapse. It thrived for another 1,000 years, its political and cultural center shifting further south to the city of Meroe. And it is here, at Meroe, that the Kushites truly forged their own unique identity, moving out of Egypt's shadow and creating a civilization that was powerful, innovative, and distinctly their own. And it is this very uniqueness that made them so easy for a Eurocentric historical tradition to ignore. Imagine yourself now in the city of Meroe around 150 CE. You are standing in a bustling metropolis, located strategically between the Nile and the Atbara rivers, at the crossroads of trade routes from Central Africa, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean world. The air is hazy,
filled with the smoke and the rhythmic clang of hammers on metal. This is one of the ancient world's great industrial centers. Meroe was the Birmingham of ancient Africa, a city built on the production of iron. You see the vast mounds of slag, the waste product of smelting, piled high like small hills around the city, a testament to centuries of industrial-scale production. This technology, likely learned from the Assyrians, was perfected here. Meroitic iron tools allowed for greater agricultural yields in the semi-arid savanna, and their iron weapons, spears, swords, and arrowheads, equipped their formidable armies. You walk through the city and see a culture that is a vibrant fusion. The great temple is dedicated to Amun, the god they brought with them from Egypt, but next to it stands a temple to a uniquely Meroitic god, the lion-headed warrior god Apademak. The art on the temple walls is a fascinating blend. The figures are styled like Egyptian reliefs, but their features, their clothing, their jewelry are distinctly Nubian. The pharaohs here are not the slender figures of Egyptian art. They are powerful, robust rulers, depicted with their own royal regalia. And the rulers are not always men. One of the most remarkable features of Meroitic society was the power wielded by women. You might see the Kandake, the queen mother or ruling queen, presiding over a ceremony. These were not mere consorts, they were absolute monarchs in their own right. Figures like Amanirinas, Amani-Shaketo, and Shanaktakete ruled the empire, commanded armies, and commissioned vast building projects. The Roman historian Strabo tells the story of the one-eyed Kandake, a likely reference to Amanirinas, who led her army against the Roman legions in Egypt in 24 BC. She sacked the Roman forts at Aswan and Philae, tearing down the statues of Emperor Augustus and taking the bronze heads back to Meroe as trophies. One of these heads was discovered by archaeologists buried beneath the steps of a temple in her capital, a final act of defiance ensuring every person who entered would symbolically tread upon the head of the Roman emperor. She fought the might of Rome to a standstill, eventually negotiating a peace treaty with Augustus himself that was surprisingly favorable to Kush, establishing a permanent border and exempting them from tribute. This was a woman who challenged an emperor and won. Yet, how many of us have ever heard her name? Now you leave the city and cross to the eastern bank of the Nile, to the royal necropolis. The sight before you is breathtaking. A forest of pyramids, over 200 of them, stretches across the desert landscape, more than in all of Egypt. But these are not copies of the Giza pyramids. They are uniquely Meroitic. Tall, slender, with steeply angled sides of 60 to 70 degrees, built of sandstone blocks. At the base of each is a small offering chapel, its walls decorated with reliefs blending Egyptian and Meroitic styles. The pharaohs here are not the slender figures of Egyptian art. They are powerful, robust rulers, depicted with their own royal regalia. And the rulers are not always men. One of the most remarkable features of Meroitic society was the power wielded by women. You might see the Kandake, the queen mother or ruling queen, presiding over a ceremony. These were not mere consorts, they were absolute monarchs in their own right. Figures like Amanirinas, Amani-Shaketo, and Shanaktakete ruled the empire, commanded armies, and commissioned vast building projects.
The Roman historian Strabo tells the story of the one-eyed Candace, a likely reference to Amanirenas, who led her army against the Roman legions in Egypt in 24 BC. She sacked the Roman forts at Aswan and Philae, tearing down the statues of Emperor Augustus and taking the bronze heads back to Meroe as trophies. One of these heads was discovered by archaeologists buried beneath the steps of a temple in her capital, a final act of defiance, ensuring every person who entered would symbolically tread upon the head of the Roman emperor. She fought the might of Rome to a standstill, eventually negotiating a peace treaty with Augustus himself that was surprisingly favorable to Kush, establishing a permanent border and exempting them from tribute. This was a woman who challenged an emperor and won.
And it is here, in these tombs and on the walls of their temples, that you find the ultimate symbol of their independence and the ultimate reason for their historical silence, their own script. By the 2nd century BCE, the Kushites had developed the Meroic script to write their own language. It was an alphabetic script with 23 signs, a remarkable innovation. But here is the tragedy. While we can read the script, we know what sounds the letters make, we do not understand the language itself. The Meroic language is lost. Their voices are trapped behind a wall of silence. We can see their art, touch their pottery, stand in their temples, but we cannot read their own accounts of their history, their literature, their beliefs. Their story, for now, is told only through the mute testimony of archaeology and the biased accounts of their rivals. The decline of Kush was a slow one, beginning around the 2nd century CE. 1,000 years of intensive iron production had likely led to deforestation and environmental degradation. The rise of Roman Egypt shifted trade routes, bypassing Meroe. And a new power was rising to their east in the highlands of modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea. A kingdom that would grow rich on the Red Sea trade. A kingdom that would deal the final, decisive blow to the once mighty empire of Kush. This new power was the kingdom of Aksum. The erasure of Kush from our history books was a gradual process, born of prejudice, academic neglect, and the tragedy of a lost language. For centuries, it was viewed as a mere appendage of Egypt, its magnificent ruins dismissed as crude imitations. But the hidden truth reveals a civilization that was a powerhouse for over 2 millennia, a kingdom that conquered its colonizer, an industrial center that armed its armies with iron, a society where women ruled, and a culture that created its own unique art and language. To forget Kush is to forget a crucial chapter in the story of Africa and, indeed, the world. Now let us turn our gaze east from the fading embers of Meroe on the Nile to the rising star of Aksum in the Ethiopian highlands. You must recalibrate your understanding of the ancient world once again. Forget the idea of sub-Saharan Africa as an isolated land cut off from the great civilizations of Eurasia. I want you to see it as it truly was, a vital nexus of global trade, a hub of innovation, and the seat of an empire so powerful that a Persian prophet in the 3rd century CE, the prophet Mani, would name it one of the 4 great powers of the world, the equal of Rome, Persia, and China. Imagine yourself standing in the port city of Adulis on the Red Sea coast of modern-day Eritrea around 300 CE. The air is hot and humid, thick with the smell of salt, spices, and the sweat of 100 nations. Your ears are filled with a cacophony of languages. Ge'ez, the language of the Aksumite locals. Greek, the lingua franca of the Mediterranean merchants. Sabaean from the Arabian Peninsula. And tongues from as far away as India. The harbor is crowded. You see the stitched planked dhows of the Arabs alongside the larger, more robust galleys of the Roman traders. This is the gateway to Aksum, the engine of its wealth.
A Greco-Roman merchant's guide from the 1st century CE, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, gives us a detailed snapshot of this trade. From the African interior, caravans brought goods to Adulis that were worth a fortune in the wider world. Raw ivory, rhinoceros horns, tortoise shells, gold, emeralds, and exotic animals. In return, the Aksumite merchants imported manufactured goods from the Roman Empire, fine textiles, glassware, brass, copper, and iron tools. Aksum was the middleman, the gatekeeper controlling the flow of goods between the Mediterranean world and the Indian Ocean. Its rulers grew fantastically wealthy by levying taxes on this trade. From the sweltering coast, you travel inland, climbing high into the cool, fertile plateau of the Ethiopian highlands. The landscape changes dramatically. Gone is the arid coast. Here you find rolling hills, well-watered valleys, and fields of teff, barley, and wheat. This is the heartland of Aksum, and at its center is the capital city, also named Aksum. As you approach the city, you see something impossible rising from the landscape: a forest of stone. These are the famous stelae of Aksum, monolithic granite obelisks that dominate the skyline. They are unlike anything else in the ancient world. You stand before the greatest of them, now known as the Great Stele. Though it now lies broken on the ground where it fell during its erection some 1700 years ago, its scale is almost incomprehensible. It was carved from a single piece of granite, standing over 33 meters tall and weighing an estimated 500 tons. To put that in perspective, it is heavier than any single obelisk erected by the ancient Egyptians. How did they do it? The engineering challenges are staggering. The granite was quarried miles away. It had to be moved, likely using a system of log rollers, ropes, and thousands of laborers. Then it had to be erected into a vertical position, a feat requiring massive earthen ramps, levers, and a profound understanding of physics and logistics. And the carving is exquisite. The stelae are not blank pillars. They are carved to represent multi-story buildings, complete with false doors at the base, and intricate patterns representing timber beams and windows climbing to the top. These were not just grave markers for the Aksumite kings and nobles. They were potent symbols of power, wealth, and technical prowess. Celestial ladders designed to connect the earthly realm of the king with the divine realm of the gods. They were a message to the world, a declaration that a great power resided here. You walk through the city and see other signs of this power. Aksum was one of the very first states in sub-Saharan Africa to mint its own coins. Beginning around 270 CE, Aksumite kings issued beautiful coins in gold, silver, and bronze. This was a hugely significant development. Coinage is not just for trade. It is a declaration of sovereignty, a projection of royal authority. The earliest coins bear the pre-Christian symbol of the disk and crescent, a link to their older religious traditions rooted in South Arabia. They are inscribed in Greek,
a nod to their importance in international trade. But then, in the mid-4th century CE, something changes. A king named Ezana comes to the throne, and the coins tell a story of radical transformation. The pagan symbols disappear, replaced by the Christian cross. Ezana had converted to Christianity, guided by his childhood tutor, a Syrian Christian named Frumentius. This decision made Axum one of the first empires in the world to officially adopt Christianity as its state religion, alongside Armenia and only shortly before the Roman Empire itself. We have direct evidence of this monumental shift from Ezana himself on the remarkable Ezana stone. This granite slab, inscribed in 3 languages, Ge'ez, Sabaean, and Greek, is a record of his military victories. But it also serves as a spiritual autobiography. On one part of the stone, he gives thanks for his victories to his pagan war god, Muharrem. But on another, likely inscribed later in his reign, he attributes his success to the Lord of Heaven, the Christian God. This single artifact captures the moment of conversion, a pivotal event that would forever shape the culture, identity, and destiny of Ethiopia. Ezana was not just a pious convert. He was a conqueror. It was he who marched his armies west into the declining kingdom of Kush. His inscriptions boast of his campaign, of destroying the towns of the Noba people and reaching the confluence of the Nile and Atbara rivers, where he sacked the town of Meroe. He claims to have destroyed their idols and carried off their wealth. This was the final death knell for the Kushite kingdom. Axum was now the undisputed superpower of the region, its influence stretching from the Nile Valley, across the Red Sea, into the Arabian Peninsula. Around 525 CE, King Calib of Axum would launch a massive amphibious invasion of the Himyarite kingdom in modern-day Yemen, a major military undertaking to protect the Christians there from persecution. This was an African empire projecting its power overseas, intervening in the affairs of Arabia, a major player in the great game between the Byzantine Roman Empire and Sasanian Persia. So what happened? How did this mighty empire, this global trading power, this ancient Christian kingdom fade so completely from the Western historical consciousness? The hidden truth is that Axum wasn't erased by a single catastrophic event, but by the slow and inexorable shifting of the tectonic plates of history. The first blow was the rise of Islam in the 7th century. The Arab conquest swept across North Africa and the Middle East, fundamentally reordering the political and economic landscape. The Red Sea, once a Roman lake and the highway of Axumite trade, was now controlled by the Islamic caliphates. Axum's old trading partners in the Byzantine Empire were cut off. The lifeblood of the empire, international trade, was slowly choked off. The second blow may have been environmental. Recent paleoclimatological research analyzing sediment cores from lakes in the Ethiopian highlands suggests that this period of isolation coincided with a prolonged period of drought and environmental degradation. A less predictable climate would have crippled Axum's agricultural base, weakening the state from within. Isolated from the Christian world and facing economic and environmental crises, Axum's center of power began to shift away from the old capital and the coast, moving deeper into the defensible highlands. The kingdom didn't vanish entirely. Its legacy was carried on by subsequent Ethiopian dynasties, its Ge'ez language and script preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and its identity as one of the world's most ancient Christian nations fiercely maintained. But its role as an international superpower was over.
To the historians of Europe, it became a distant, semi-mythical kingdom, the land of Prester John, a Christian king lost in a sea of Islam. Its earlier history as a rival to Rome and Persia, its technological marvels, and its pivotal role in global trade were largely forgotten, a story preserved only within Ethiopian itself until modern archaeology began to uncover the stunning ruins of its former glory. The stories of Kush and Aksum are a powerful corrective to a history that has for too long ignored the African continent. They reveal a region that was not peripheral, but central, not isolated, but deeply connected, not a passive recipient of culture, but a dynamic creator of it. They were erased not because they were insignificant, but because their stories challenged the comfortable simplistic narratives of a history written from a European and Near Eastern perspective. They were powerful, they were black, and they were inconvenient to the established story. We have journeyed down the Nile and across the Red Sea, uncovering two mighty African empires whose stories were suppressed. Now we must travel to a completely different world, a world without cities, without grand temples, without a written language, a world of endless grass, of thundering hooves, and of a people so fierce and so elusive that they built an empire on the wind itself. They were a civilization defined not by what they built, but by what they could destroy. They were the ultimate outsiders, the barbarians at the gate in the histories of the Greeks and Persians. But this label was a mask, a convenient fiction to hide a more complex and terrifying truth. These were not disorganized savages. They were a sophisticated and powerful confederation that mastered a revolutionary form of warfare, dominated a continent-sized territory for half a millennium, and created a culture of breathtaking artistry and brutal ritual. We go now to the great Eurasian steppe to find the truth behind the legend of the Scythians. Imagine a world without horizons. You are standing in a sea of grass that stretches in every direction, meeting the vast, empty sky. This is the Pontic-Caspian steppe, a territory stretching from the Danube in the west to the Altai Mountains in the east. It is a harsh, unforgiving land of scorching summers and brutal winters. For a conventional, settled civilization, it is an impassable barrier. But for the Scythians, who flourished here from the 7th to the 3rd centuries BCE, it was a superhighway. Their cities were their wagons, their fields were the endless pastures, and their wealth was on the hoof. Vast herds of horses, cattle, and sheep. The Greeks, who encountered them on the northern shores of the Black Sea, were both fascinated and terrified. The historian Herodotus, our main written source, portrays them as a wild, nomadic people with bizarre customs. They drank the blood of their first slain enemy, used human skulls as drinking cups, and inhaled the smoke of burning hemp in ritual saunas. This is the popular image of the Scythian, the savage barbarian. It's a compelling story, but it's a Greek story, told by an outsider looking in. It obscures the reality of their power and sophistication. The unspoken truth whispers that the Scythians were not just a tribe. They were a nomadic empire, a loose confederation of peoples bound by a common culture and a shared mastery of the steppe. Their social structure was complex and hierarchical, with powerful kings and a wealthy warrior aristocracy. And their military was one of the most effective and revolutionary fighting forces of the ancient world. They perfected a new kind of warfare, one that sedentary empires were utterly unprepared to face. To understand their power, You must understand their relationship with the horse. The Scythians were arguably the greatest horsemen of antiquity. They were among the first to master riding, and they developed key technologies like the saddle and bridle. For a Scythian, life was lived on horseback. Children learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk. This gave them unparalleled mobility. But it was the combination of this mobility with a devastating weapon that made them invincible on their own turf: the composite recurve bow. This was not a simple wooden bow. It was a marvel of engineering, crafted from laminated layers of wood, sinew, and horn, bound together with animal glue. This composite construction allowed it to store immense energy. It was short enough to be wielded easily from horseback, yet it had the power of a much larger infantry bow, with a draw weight of over 100 pounds, capable of shooting specialized armor-piercing arrows over 150 meters. A Scythian warrior was a living weapon system, a mobile artillery platform that could appear out of nowhere, unleash a storm of arrows, and vanish before any counterattack could be mounted. The terrifying effectiveness of this new way of war is best illustrated by one of the most famous military fiascos of the ancient world: the Scythian campaign of the Persian Emperor Darius the Great around 513 BCE. Darius, the ruler of the largest empire the world had yet seen, invaded the steppe with a massive conventional army. Herodotus claims an unbelievable 700,000 men. He came to conquer, to subdue the barbarians and add their lands to his empire. He expected a decisive battle, a clash of armies where his superior numbers and heavy infantry would crush the Scythian horsemen. But the battle never came. Imagine you are a Scythian warrior under your king, Edanthursas. You see the vast Persian army, a slow-moving river of men and metal, crawling across your ancestral lands. You are not afraid. You are contemptuous. You and your fellow horsemen are a phantom army. You refuse to engage in a pitched battle. Instead, you execute a brilliant strategy of denial, a perfect example of asymmetric warfare. You retreat deep into the endless steppe, drawing the Persian behemoth ever further from its supply lines. As you retreat, you leave nothing behind. You fill in the wells, burn the pastures, and drive your herds away. This is a scorched earth policy on a continental scale. The Persian army marches for weeks, then months, finding only dust and desolation. They are tormented by your hit-and-run attacks. You appear on the horizon, a cloud of dust. Before the Persian infantry can form up, your horse archers are upon them. You gallop in circles around their formations, unleashing volley after volley of arrows. You practice the famed Parthian shot, feigning retreat only to turn in your saddle and fire backwards at your pursuers. The Persian losses mount daily, not from a great battle, but from 1,000 small cuts, from thirst, from hunger, and from the psychological strain of fighting an enemy they can never catch. Darius, in his frustration, sends a message to Edanthursas demanding he stand and fight or submit. The Scythian king's reply, as recorded by Herodotus, is a masterpiece of psychological warfare. "This is my way, Persian," he says. "I have never fled from any man in fear. I am only doing what I always do in peacetime, wandering from pasture to pasture.
If you are so eager to fight, find the tombs of our fathers and try to desecrate them. Then you will see whether we will fight for them or not. But until then, we will not fight you, for we have no cities or cultivated lands to fear you will capture or lay waste. It was a declaration of a different kind of power, a power not rooted in stone walls or fertile fields, but in mobility and the mastery of a harsh environment. Darius, his army exhausted and demoralized, was forced into a humiliating retreat. The Scythians harried his forces all the way back to the Danube, inflicting heavy casualties. The world's greatest empire had been defeated by a people with no cities. This is the Scythian military genius. But where is their culture? If they left no cities, no grand monuments, how can we know them? How can we tell their story from their own perspective? The hidden truth reveals that the Scythians did leave monuments, but they were not for the living. They were for the dead. And their history is not written in stone, but in gold, in felt, in leather, and in the tattooed skin of their own bodies. To find it, we must become archaeologists. We must travel to the frozen highlands of the Altai Mountains in Siberia, to a place called Pazyryk. Here, in the 1940s, a Soviet archaeologist named Sergei Rudenko began to excavate a series of Scythian burial mounds, known as kurgans. What he found would revolutionize our understanding of this lost empire. The kurgans were deep, log-lined burial chambers that, over the centuries, had filled with water and frozen solid. The permafrost had created a perfect time capsule, preserving organic materials that would have rotted away anywhere else. For the first time, we could see the Scythian world not through the eyes of the Greeks, but in all its vibrant, colorful reality. Imagine being there, as the ice is slowly melted away with hot water, revealing the secrets of a 2,500-year-old tomb. The first thing you notice is the smell of damp earth and ancient leather. You see the bodies of sacrificed horses, 10 of them, still wearing their elaborate harnesses, with fantastical griffins and stags carved into the leather and wood, some covered in gold foil. They were arranged to pull a massive, disassembled chariot into the afterlife. Then you see the chieftain himself, his body mummified and preserved by the ice. And his skin is a canvas. From his shoulders to his feet, he is covered in intricate tattoos of swirling, stylized animals, leaping stags with elaborate antlers, coiled predators, and mythical griffins locked in combat. This was not random decoration. This was a visual language, a permanent record of his status, his lineage, and his spiritual beliefs. The pain of the process, using a fine needle to inject soot-based pigment, was a rite of passage, a mark of a true warrior. You look around the tomb chamber. The walls are draped with the oldest pile carpet in the world, its colors still vivid, depicting rows of horsemen and fallow deer. There are low tables laden with food, remnants of a final feast. There is a small tent-like structure, a frame of sticks with a felt covering. Inside, you find a bronze cauldron filled with burnt stones, and a leather flask containing cannabis seeds. This is the physical proof of Herodotus's story of the ritual sauna. The Scythians would heat the stones, place them in the cauldron, and throw the hemp seeds on top. inhaling the intoxicating smoke in a ritual of purification or spiritual communion.
And the gold, the sheer quantity and artistry are staggering. You find a solid gold torque, a warrior's belt buckle depicting the coiled panther, and hundreds of small gold plaques once sewn onto clothing, each a miniature masterpiece of the distinctive Scythian animal style. This art is dynamic, full of movement and tension. It depicts a world of fierce, often violent natural forces, a tiger attacking an elk, an eagle locked in combat with a snake. This was not just decoration. It was a cosmology, a way of representing the fundamental principles of their world, the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth, the struggle between predator and prey, order and chaos. And, perhaps most shockingly, you find that many of these warrior burials, complete with weapons and armor, are not for men. They are for women. The Pazyryk discoveries and others across the steppe have confirmed that Scythian women were not confined to the domestic sphere. Many were trained warriors who fought and hunted alongside the men. They were archers, horsewomen, and leaders. Here, in the frozen earth of Siberia, is the archaeological reality behind the Greek myths of the Amazons, the fierce warrior women who lived at the edge of the known world. So why were the Scythians erased? Their erasure was built into their very way of life. As a nomadic people, they left no cities to fall into ruin and be rediscovered. Their empire was not a territory on a map, but a network of tribes and a sphere of influence that was constantly in flux. They had no written language, so they left no histories, no poems, no letters. Their story was told by their enemies, who cast them as the archetypal barbarian, the savage other against which civilized societies define themselves. Their end was not a dramatic collapse, but a gradual absorption. Over time, they were displaced and assimilated by other rising nomadic groups, most notably the Sarmatians. Their language, their specific customs, and their political identity faded away, blending into the great melting pot of the Eurasian steppe. Their legacy was buried with their chieftains, deep beneath the earth. Their spectacular culture of gold and tattoos waiting for centuries in the frozen silence until a curious shovel brought them back into the light. We have now journeyed into the heart of two forgotten continents of power, the African kingdoms of Kush and Aksum, whose monumental achievements were marginalized and ignored, and the nomadic empire of the Scythians, whose city-less civilization was misunderstood and maligned. We have seen that empires can be erased by conquest, by the shifting of trade routes, by the silence of an undeciphered script, or by a lifestyle that leaves no ruins. Each story reveals a different mechanism of historical forgetting.
But there is another kind of erasure, perhaps the most profound and unsettling of all. What happens when a civilization is not small, or nomadic, or on the periphery? What happens when it is vast, urban, and technologically advanced, one of the great cradles of human society, and yet its story is almost a complete blank? What happens when an entire subcontinent of cities, numbering in the hundreds, home to millions of people, simply vanishes from history for 3,000 years, leaving behind a language we cannot read and a mystery we cannot solve? In our final part, we will travel to the banks of the Indus River to confront the ghost of the Harappan civilization and to ask the most fundamental question of all: how is it possible for an empire of this magnitude to be so completely and utterly lost? You have journeyed with us through the dust of forgotten cities,
stood in the silent throne rooms of phantom kings, and traced the outlines of empires that the maps have ignored. You have seen the evidence, the towering stelae, the cryptic seals, the golden treasures buried in frozen earth. You have learned the what. You have witnessed the how. But now you must face the final, most unsettling question, the one that echoes in the ruins and whispers from the unread tablets. Why? Why were these titans of the ancient world not just forgotten, but seemingly erased? The comfortable answer is that time is a relentless tide, that all empires must fall and fade. But this is a lullaby told to conceal a more brutal truth. Erasure is not a passive process. It is not a gentle fading into twilight. It is an act, a decision, sometimes violent, sometimes subtle, but always deliberate. It is the tearing of a page, the burning of a library, the rewriting of a truth until the original is no longer recognizable. The dark reasons for their disappearance are not found in the simple decay of stone, but in the complex, often malicious, hearts of men. To understand this, we must return to the battlefields not of sword and spear, but of memory and narrative. For this is where an empire truly dies. Our journey into this final hidden truth begins in the heart of Anatolia, on a windswept plateau where the Hittite Empire once commanded the known world. Stand with me now amidst the ruins of their capital, Hattusa. Feel the chill wind whip through the lion gate, the carved beasts standing as silent, weathered sentinels. Before you lie the foundations of a city that was, for 400 years, the equal of Egypt. Its archives held thousands of clay tablets, a library of law, diplomacy, and religion. It was from here that King Muwatalli II marshaled 3,700 heavy chariots for the Battle of Kadesh. It was here that his successor, Hattusili III, ratified the world's first comprehensive peace treaty with Ramesses the Great, a document of such sophistication that it called upon 1,000 gods as witnesses and established international law for the extradition of refugees. This was not a minor tribe. This was a superpower. So, how does a superpower vanish so completely that, for 3,000 years, its only memorial was a handful of misunderstood mentions in the Old Testament, where they are listed as a small Canaanite clan, a footnote in another people's story? The late Bronze Age collapse was the catalyst, a perfect storm of climate change, famine, and the mysterious invasions of the Sea Peoples that shattered civilizations across the Mediterranean. Hattusa burned around 1178 BCE, but the fire that consumed the city was not what erased the Hittites. The true erasure came after. It was an act of profound and total replacement. The hidden truth reveals that the Hittites were erased by the sheer alien nature of their identity in the world that followed. Their language, the oldest attested Indo-European tongue, was unlike the Semitic languages of their neighbors. When their empire fell, there was no one left to read their cuneiform script. New peoples, the Phrygians, the Lydians, moved into Anatolia. They built their towns on top of Hittite foundations, but they did not inherit their stories. The Hittite gods fell silent, their names forgotten. The narrative thread was not just dropped, it was severed. Imagine you, a scribe in the rising Assyrian Empire, centuries later.
You unearth a strange tablet covered in wedge-shaped writing you cannot read, depicting storm gods you do not recognize, referencing a great king from a land you now call Tabal. It is a relic of a dead world. It has no place in your history, which begins with your own gods, your own kings. You set it aside. It is an anomaly. Over time, thousands of such anomalies are set aside. The world is simplified. The story is streamlined. The Hittites, a complex, multi-ethnic empire with a unique Indo-European heritage, are flattened, simplified, and ultimately replaced in the historical record by the peoples who came after and, more importantly, by the peoples who wrote about them. The biblical writers, composing their narrative a half-millennium after Hattusa's fall, encountered small Neo-Hittite city-states in Syria. These were the last embers of a dying fire. And so, in their story, that is all the Hittites ever were, a local tribe from whom Abraham bought a burial plot, a source of foreign wives for King Solomon. It was an erasure by misidentification, a reduction of a colossal reality to a manageable, minor detail. The Hittite Empire wasn't just conquered by swords, it was conquered by stories, overwritten by a more persistent, more influential narrative that had no room for a forgotten Anatolian superpower. Their memory lay dormant, buried under their own cities, until a German archaeologist named Hugo Winkler dug into the ruins of Hattusa in 1906 and pulled a clay tablet from the earth, a tablet that was a copy of the Treaty of Kadesh, a treaty also carved into the temple walls of their great rival, Egypt. Suddenly, the footnote fought back. The ghost began to speak, but for 30 centuries it had been silenced. The unspoken truth whispers that an empire can be erased not just by its enemies, but by the indifference of the future. It can be erased by the simple, catastrophic act of being misunderstood and misrepresented, until the caricature replaces the reality. The Hittites were victims of a historical narrative that valued simplicity over complexity, a story that needed minor characters, not rival protagonists. Now, let us travel southeast, from the highlands of Anatolia to the fertile plains of what is now Pakistan. Here, along the banks of a phantom river, lies the ghost of an even older, even more enigmatic civilization. You are walking the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, a metropolis that thrived 4,500 years ago. The air is thick with dust and silence. But look closer. This is not a primitive settlement. The streets are laid out in a perfect grid, a marvel of urban planning. You see the remains of two-story houses built from millions of standardized baked bricks. Almost every house had its own private bathroom and a connection to a sophisticated city-wide covered drainage system. This sanitation network was more advanced than anything Rome would build 2,000 years later. In the center of the city rises a great mound, crowned by the Great Bath, a massive, watertight public pool, possibly used for ritual purification. This was the heart of the Indus Valley civilization, a realm that covered more than 1,000,000 square kilometers, larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. They traded with cities in the Persian Gulf. They developed precise systems of weights and measures. They were masters of their world.
And yet, we do not know their real name. We do not know what they called their cities. We do not know who their rulers were or what gods they worshipped. We know nothing of their laws, their literature, their history, their stories. Why? Because we cannot read their writing. Look at this, a small square of soapstone, a seal, small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. It is exquisitely carved with the image of a bull, its muscles tense, its head lowered. Above the bull are 5 delicate symbols, a script unlike any other. Thousands of these seals have been found. They are the voice of the Indus Valley people, and they are utterly silent. Here, the erasure was of a different kind. It was not an act of misrepresentation, but an act of profound and total acoustic severance. The dark reason for their disappearance from the history books is the loss of the key to their language. Their civilization did not collapse in a single fiery event like Hattusa. Around 1900 BCE, the cities began to decline. The reasons are still debated. A shift in the monsoon patterns, the drying up of the Ghaggar-Hakra river system that was their lifeline, a slow unwinding of their trade networks. As the people dispersed into smaller, more rural communities, the knowledge of their complex script, a tool of urban administration and trade, likely faded. It was not burned by conquerors, it was forgotten in the face of survival. The hidden truth reveals that a civilization's greatest vulnerability is its voice. The Egyptians carved their story in monumental hieroglyphs on stone, ensuring its survival. The Mesopotamians wrote their epics on durable clay. The Indus people wrote on small, portable seals, and perhaps on perishable materials like palm leaves or cloth that have long since vanished. Their entire intellectual world, their philosophy, their identity, was entrusted to a medium that proved fragile, and to a code that proved unbreakable. Imagine the last scribe of Harappa, an old man whose children have moved to a farming village, who no longer see the need for the complex symbols he knows. He looks at his collection of seals, at the elegant script that holds the memory of his people, and realizes there is no one left to teach. In that moment, an entire empire is condemned to silence. It is an erasure so complete that it leaves us with a deafening quiet. We can walk their streets, touch their bricks, admire their engineering, but we are forever locked out of their minds. They are a civilization of ghosts.
This silence created a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed other stories. The arrival of Indo-Aryan peoples in the subcontinent, with their own vibrant oral traditions that would become the Vedas, created a new historical starting point. The memory of the great brick cities faded into myth, perhaps becoming tales of demon-haunted ruins. The Indus Valley civilization was not overwritten, it was simply unheard. It lay waiting under mounds of earth, its existence entirely unsuspected until the 1920s, when an archaeologist's spade struck a baked brick in a place called Harappa. The discovery was not of a lost chapter, but of an entire forgotten volume in the story of humanity. The unspoken truth whispers that the most effective way to erase a people is not to destroy their bodies, but to silence their words. Without their script, the people of the Indus Valley are eternally prehistoric. They are a collection of artifacts, a puzzle with no solution, their history erased by the simple, devastating fact that we cannot hear them. Their magnificent cities are the loudest testament to their silence. From the silent plains of the Indus, our journey takes us south, down the Nile, past the familiar temples of Luxor and Karnak, beyond the borders of traditional Egypt, into the land once called Nubia, modern-day Sudan. Here, the desert sands hold the secret of an empire whose erasure was perhaps the most insidious of all. It was not an erasure of silence or misrepresentation, but one born of prejudice. This was the kingdom of Kush. For centuries, Kush was Egypt's southern neighbor, a source of gold, ivory, and soldiers, but also a rival, often subjugated but never truly broken. Then, in the 8th century BCE, the tables turned. Egypt, weakened and fragmented, was ruled by competing Libyan dynasts. From his capital at Napata, near the holy mountain of Jebel Barkal, the Kushite king Piye saw this not as an opportunity for plunder, but as a mandate from the god Amun, whom he worshipped in a purer form than the chaotic Egyptians to the north. Around 728 BCE, he launched an invasion. His victory stele, a magnificent granite slab, tells the story in his own words. It is not the boast of a barbarian conqueror. It is the pious, strategic, and relentless account of a man who believed he was reuniting a sacred kingdom. He moved down the Nile with his army and his fleet, besieging and conquering city after city. He describes his disgust at the Egyptian princes. "I found their chambers filled with the finest of horses. They had made their horses eat fish. This is the greatest of abominations in the god's sight." He saw himself as a reformer, a true pharaoh. And he succeeded. Piye and his successors became the 25th dynasty of Egypt. They ruled a unified kingdom stretching from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. These black pharaohs, as they came to be known, did not destroy Egypt. They revitalized it. They built and restored temples at Karnak and Memphis in a style so classically Egyptian it was once mistaken for a much older dynasty. They revered Egypt's past and saw themselves as their rightful heirs. They were not an interruption. They were a renaissance. So why, for so long, were they a mere footnote in the grand story of Egypt? Why was their immense kingdom, which outlasted the New Kingdom and built more pyramids than Egypt itself, relegated to the shadows? The dark reason is one of the most shameful in the annals of history. The hidden truth reveals that the kingdom of Kush was a victim of an academic erasure, fueled by the colonial era biases of early archaeology and Egyptology. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, as Western scholars began to systematically study ancient Egypt, they operated within a worldview that could not, or would not, accept the idea of a powerful, innovative, and culturally sophisticated Black African civilization. The prevailing narrative held that Africa was a continent without history, and that any sign of civilization must have been imported from outside. When archaeologists like George Reisner of Harvard University excavated the royal cemeteries of Kush at El Kuru and Nuri in the early 1900s, they found overwhelming evidence of a wealthy and powerful dynasty. But Reisner, trapped in the prejudices of his time, concocted a theory of a light-skinned race of foreign invaders, a Libyan-Egyptian elite who had imposed themselves on the native Nubian population to create the kingdom. He could not bring himself to attribute these achievements to the ancestors of the dark-skinned people he saw around him. The Kushites, in his view, had to be explained away. Their agency, their identity, had to be denied. This bias permeated the field for decades. Kushite art was dismissed as derivative.
Their rule over Egypt was framed as a brief, chaotic, and illegitimate episode. Their unique Meroitic script, which they developed centuries later, was seen as a crude imitation. The very notion of a black pharaoh was treated as an anomaly, an aberration, rather than the historical reality it was. Their story was systematically minimized, their achievements downplayed, their race explained away. It was an erasure not with fire or forgetting, but with the subtle and devastating poison of prejudice. Imagine standing in the necropolis of Meroe, the later capital of Kush. All around you, piercing the blue desert sky, are the steep, elegant pyramids of Kushite kings and queens. There are more than 200 of them, more than in all of Egypt. This is not the work of imitators. This is the heart of a vibrant, independent civilization that lasted for 1,000 years. It was a culture where powerful queens, the Kandakes, ruled as monarchs and led armies, one of whom, Amani-Renus, fought the legions of Rome to a standstill and forced a peace treaty with the Emperor Augustus. This was a civilization that became a major center of iron production, the Birmingham of ancient Africa.
The unspoken truth whispers that the map of history is often drawn along the color line. The erasure of Kush was a deliberate act of historical gerrymandering, designed to keep Africa, particularly Black Africa, off the map of great world civilizations. It is a stark reminder that the lens through which we view the past is never perfectly clear. It is always colored by the assumptions, the politics, and the prejudices of the present. Only in recent decades, through the work of scholars challenging these old narratives, has the ghost of Kush begun to speak again, not as a footnote to Egypt, but as a major chapter in the story of Africa and the world. From the hot sands of Nubia, we traveled to a vastly different landscape, a world without cities of stone or brick, a realm defined not by borders, but by the endless horizon. We are on the vast Eurasian steppe, the great sea of grass that stretches from the Black Sea to the borders of China. This was the domain of the Scythians. For nearly 500 years, from the 7th to the 3rd centuries BCE, this confederation of nomadic tribes was a dominant force in the ancient world. They were the undisputed masters of mounted warfare, the inventors of the saddle, the pioneers of a form of asymmetric warfare that terrified the greatest empires of the day. In 513 BCE, Darius the Great, king of the mighty Persian Empire, marched north with a colossal army to subdue them. The Scythians, under their king Edanthursas, did not meet him in a pitched battle. That was the Persian way, the way of settled empires. The Scythians simply vanished. They retreated deep into the endless steppe, their wagons and herds always one step ahead. They filled in the wells, burned the grazing lands, and used their peerless horse archers to harass the Persian supply lines, showering them with arrows and melting away before any response could be mounted. The frustrated Darius sent a message to Edanthursas, demanding he stand and fight or submit. The Scythian king's reply, as recorded by Herodotus, reveals the core of their identity. We have no cities or cultivated land to fear you will capture or destroy. But if you are determined to fight, we have the tombs of our ancestors. Find them and try to desecrate them. Then you will know whether we will fight for them. Darius, his army starving and demoralized, was forced into a humiliating retreat. The Scythians had defeated a superpower without fighting a single major battle. They were not uncultured barbarians. Their artisans produced some of the most sophisticated and dynamic goldwork ever created, a vibrant, animal-style art that teemed with life. They engaged in extensive trade with the Greeks, and, as we now know from frozen tombs discovered in the Altai Mountains, they possessed a rich and complex spiritual life, their beliefs permanently inked into their skin in the form of elaborate tattoos. So why were they erased? Why are they remembered, if at all, as a footnote in Greek and Persian history, a vague hordman from the north? The dark reason for their erasure is a fundamental bias in the very definition of civilization.
The hidden truth reveals that the Scythians were erased by a failure of historical imagination. Because they did not fit the conventional mold of an empire, they were not considered one. The Greeks, who wrote about them most extensively, saw them through a lens of fascination and condescension. They were the ultimate other, the wild, untamable nomads who lived beyond the pale of civilization. Their complex social structure, their high-status warrior women who may have inspired the Greek myths of the Amazons, their sophisticated military tactics, all were recorded, but framed as curiosities, not as the hallmarks of a major world power. They were defined by what they lacked: cities, writing, agriculture, rather than by what they possessed: unparalleled mobility, a revolutionary military doctrine, and a culture perfectly adapted to one of the world's most challenging environments. Let's descend into one of those frozen tombs at Pazyryk. The air is cold enough to burn your lungs. Here, in the permafrost, time has stood still for 2,500 years. You see the body of a chieftain, his skin a canvas of swirling, fantastical beasts. The tattoos are not crude marks. They are masterpieces of design, telling a story of spiritual power and identity. Beside him are his sacrificed horses, adorned in elaborate harnesses with carved griffins and stags. There is a carpet, the oldest ever discovered, its weaving so fine it rivals the best of Persia. There are blocks of cheese, still edible. This is not the grave of a simple barbarian. This is the tomb of a king. The unspoken truth whispers that we erase what we cannot easily categorize. The Scythians' nomadic empire was a fluid, dynamic entity that sedentary historians, ancient and modern, struggled to comprehend. It left no great ruins to excavate, no libraries to decipher. Its legacy was written on the wind, in the bloodlines of its people who were eventually absorbed by other nomadic groups like the Sarmatians, and in the DNA of warfare itself. The concept of the mounted archer, of hit-and-run tactics, would terrorize settled empires for another 2,000 years, through the Huns, the Magyars, and the Mongols. The Scythians were not a historical dead end. They were the wellspring of a military tradition that would shape the destiny of continents. Their erasure from the list of great empires is a testament to our own limited, sedentary definition of what power and civilization look like. From the open steppe, our final journey takes us into the heart of one of the most organized and ideologically driven empires of the ancient world, a civilization that stood as the absolute equal and mortal enemy of Rome
for over 400 years. We are in Persia, the land of the Sasanian Empire. Stand with me now in the desert of modern Iraq, before the staggering ruin of Tak Kasra, the palace of the Sasanian capital, Ctesiphon. Even as a fragment, it is breathtaking. The single-span brick arch, the largest in the world, soars into the sky, a testament to an empire of immense wealth, engineering genius, and imperial confidence. From 224 to 651 CE, the Sasanian Shahanshah, the King of Kings, ruled a vast territory from Mesopotamia to the Indus. This was not a forgotten backwater. This was a global superpower.
In 260 CE, the Sasanian king Shapur I achieved what no one had ever done. He defeated a major Roman army at the Battle of Edessa and captured the Roman Emperor Valerian himself. The event was a cataclysm for Roman prestige. Shapur commemorated his victory in a series of colossal rock reliefs at Nakhche Rastam, carving the image of a kneeling Roman emperor into the cliffs of his homeland for all eternity. The Sasanians were not just military rivals. Their capital was a hub of intellectual life. The Academy of Ganda Shapur was a legendary center of learning, a university where Greek, Jewish, Christian, Indian, and Persian scholars gathered to study medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. Sasanian art, with its scenes of royal hunts and intricate silverwork, would influence Byzantine and Islamic culture for centuries. So why is this great empire, Rome's true peer, so often a shadowy presence in Western history, a mere placeholder between the Achaemenid Persians of antiquity and the rise of Islam? The dark reason for their relative obscurity is one of the most powerful forces in history: ideological revolution. The hidden truth reveals that the Sasanian Empire was the victim of a paradigm shift. Its identity was inextricably linked to its state religion, Zoroastrianism. The King of Kings was the earthly agent of the supreme god Ahura Mazda in an eternal cosmic struggle against the forces of darkness, represented by Ahriman. A powerful hierarchical priesthood controlled vast estates and influenced every aspect of life. The sacred fires burning in temples across the empire were the symbols of both their faith and their state. In the 7th century CE, after a final cataclysmic war with the Byzantine Empire had left both powers exhausted, the armies of Islam swept out of Arabia. They were fueled by a new, dynamic faith. The Sasanian state, brittle and overstretched, collapsed. But this was not just a military conquest. It was a religious and cultural revolution. The new rulers brought a new god, a new holy book, a new language for administration, and a new calendar. The Sasanian past was not entirely obliterated. The administrative genius of the Persians was adopted by the new caliphate. Their science and literature were translated into Arabic and became foundational to the Islamic Golden Age. But the Sasanian identity, its Zoroastrian faith, its divine kingship, its 400-year-long story, was deliberately superseded. The new narrative cast the Sasanian era as the Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance before the truth of Islam was revealed. The fire temples were either destroyed or converted into mosques. The Zoroastrian scriptures were burned. The faith itself was suppressed, slowly fading into a minority religion. Imagine you are a Persian noble in the year 700 CE. Your father remembered the King of Kings. You remember the tales of the Savaron, the elite armored knights. But now, the language of the court is Arabic. The coins bear the name of the caliph. The call to prayer from the new minaret has replaced the chanting of the Magi. To succeed in this new world, you must adapt. You adopt the new faith, the new language. Your children will know the old stories only as legends. Within a few generations, the Sasanian world is no longer a living memory. It is history. It is the past that had to be overcome for the glorious present to be born. The unspoken truth whispers that the most complete erasure happens when a new universal truth replaces an old one. Rome fell, but its legacy was claimed and carried on by its successor, the Christian Church and the kingdoms of Europe. Rome's story became the foundational myth of the West. The Sasanian Empire fell, and its legacy was absorbed and overwritten by its successor, the Islamic Caliphate. Its story became a prelude, a cautionary tale of a magnificent but flawed kingdom that was swept away by divine will. The Great Arch of Ctesiphon stands today not as a monument to a living tradition, but as a magnificent tombstone for a lost world, an empire erased by the triumph of a new idea. We have journeyed across the ruins of 6 civilizations, each a universe of human achievement, each erased from the mainstream story for a different, darker reason. The Hittites were misrepresented. The Indus Valley was silenced. Kush was denied by prejudice. The Scythians were dismissed by definition. Aksum was isolated by geography and geopolitics. The Sasanians were superseded by a new faith. What then is the final, crucial truth that binds these stories together? It is this: history is not a science of certainty. It is not a dispassionate record of fact. It is a story, and like any story, it has authors, it has a point of view, it has protagonists and antagonists, and it has an audience. The history you were taught is the authorized version, the bestseller, the one whose narrative was the most compelling, the most useful, the most flattering to the civilizations that came to dominate the world we live in today. The stories of Rome and Greece became the epics of the West because the West saw itself as their heir. The empires we have visited tonight were inconvenient. Their stories disrupted the clean lines of the authorized narrative. They were the wrong people, from the wrong places, with the wrong ideas. A black African dynasty ruling Egypt? A nomadic confederation humbling the greatest empire on earth? A superpower in Turkey that was not part of the biblical or classical tradition? A vast urban civilization in India that vanished without a linguistic trace? A Christian kingdom in Africa that became isolated from its European counterparts? A Persian empire that was Rome's equal, whose legacy was overwritten by one of the world's great religions? These are not comfortable truths. They complicate the story. They force us to redraw the map, to question the very foundations of our historical knowledge. The hidden truth, the final truth, reveals that history is not a static monument, but a constant, brutal battlefield of memory. Every remembered fact is shadowed by a forgotten one. Every celebrated hero stands on the graves of erased rivals. Erasure is the natural consequence of power.
Power allows you to tell the story. Power allows you to choose the protagonists. Power allows you to decide who is civilized and who is a barbarian, who is a footnote, and who is the main text. For millennia, we have been reading a heavily edited manuscript. But now, the tools of archaeology, of genetics, of new historical perspectives are allowing us to see the words that were crossed out, to find the pages that were torn out. We are discovering that the past is infinitely richer, more complex, and more surprising than we ever imagined. We are finding that vast continents of human experience have been left off the map. The voices of these lost empires are faint, but they are not gone. They speak to us from a single clay tablet, from the tattoos on a frozen body, from the defiant words on a victory stele, from the silent grandeur of a ruined arch. They challenge us to become explorers of our own past, to seek out the ghosts, to listen to the silence. Because the ultimate, unspoken truth is that the act of forgetting is a choice. And therefore, the act of remembering is an act of resistance. It is a refusal to accept the simple story. It is a commitment to a more complex, more difficult, and ultimately more honest past. The history books are not finished. The final chapters have not been written, and the ghosts are waiting. The map of history, you now understand, was not drawn to be complete. It was curated to be a weapon. Through the shattered monuments and forbidden texts of these once mighty empires, we have uncovered a chilling truth. Their disappearance was not an accident, but a deliberate act. The silence in our textbooks is not an absence of knowledge, but a testament to the power it took to erase them. The greatest empires are not the ones we remember, but the ones that were so feared they had to be forgotten.